Welcome to Supercool, the show tracking the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation reshaping global industries and cities. Each week, we spotlight the climate technologies, strategies, and business models, elevating profits, improving modern life, and outperforming the status quo. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe or leave a review wherever you listen. And if you want to go deeper into next-gen climate innovations now scaling, check out our weekly newsletter. You can find it at getsuper.cool. For nearly a year, we've been sharing stories from the front lines of the global transition to a low-carbon future. Said another way, each week we talk with the world's leading climate innovators. But at Supercool, we're not here to talk about solving climate change just so we don't die. We're here to talk about solving climate so tomorrow is objectively better than today. For us, that means spotlighting solutions that people want, not because they're greener, but because they're better. They're faster, cheaper, smarter, better designed. Solutions that fit how we want to live and amplify what we already aspire to. That's super cool. I was recently on a UK podcast, shout out to host Alex Murdoch, and he asked me what I thought about the state of climate awareness in 2025. I gave him two answers. First, whatever level of awareness we have today, it would be exponentially higher if not for the willful ignorance of just 273 people on the planet. I'm talking, of course, about the 220 Republican members of the House and the 53 Republican U.S. senators who want to eliminate common sense policies that make the U.S. more competitive, more energy secure, and more innovative. All they'd have to do is keep the incentives in place for clean energy technologies. If and when those 273 people come to their collective senses and decide to support the next wave of American innovation, climate action will accelerate globally overnight. The world wants U.S. leadership, and the world needs our partnership. Second, I thought about Greta Thunberg. She rose to global prominence by shaming her elders for not acting fast enough or big enough on climate. She stood at the UN, stared down the world's most powerful people, and told them, "We're failing." She hung out with Al Gore. She mobilized many in her generation. She turned despair into action. And for the 15 million followers she has on Instagram and across her social platforms, she continues to lead and raise awareness. Now, to be clear, I think her views on the Middle East are misinformed. But her power, her clarity, and her impact on climate, undeniable. So that's another way to look at climate awareness. And then I thought about race cars. I thought about the rise of a global phenomenon, a racing series that has grown from an idea just over a decade ago to a global fan base of 500 million people by the end of 2024. That's Formula E. Electric formula racing features some of the most advanced, powerful, and fastest cars in the world, blasting straight through the hearts of the most cosmopolitan cities on the planet. Zero emissions, massive audience, 500 million fans worldwide. That's also climate awareness, and business, and entertainment, and a clear glimpse of the low-carbon future. And how do people who love to watch those cars race get to the races? They don't drive. I mean, of course not. That's what their parents would have done a generation ago. They don't actually want to own cars. So instead, they Uber. So if I think about the state of global climate awareness in 2025, a quarter of the way through our climate century, the best barometer I can think of is the growth of Formula E. But Formula E hasn't experienced this growth because it's sustainable. It attracts audiences and sponsors and cities competing to host races because it's nailed product market fit. It's a fully electric, open-wheel, single-seater motorsport championship built for city centers and designed for a generation that wants speed, drama, and zero emissions. While both Formula E and Formula One feature those single-seater open-wheel race cars, they're built for different kinds of tracks and different visions of the future. Formula One is tuned for traditional race circuits, long straights, sweeping corners, raw top-end speed. Formula E is engineered for tight, technical street circuits, quick bursts, sharp handling, and constant action. Both are fast. Formula E just brings that speed closer to where people actually live. Which brings us to today's guest. When Roger Griffiths first heard about Formula E in 2014, it didn't look like the future. He was a veteran of IndyCar, Le Mans, and F1, a self-described petrolhead. And when he visited the series' new base at Donington Park in the UK, he wasn't that impressed. The cars were clunky, the battery was huge and underpowered, and the performance definitely unconvincing. But Roger looked past the tech and saw the people. Formula One racing legends like Michael Andretti, Alain Prost, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Frank Williams were staking their reputations. Teams from Germany, France, and the UK were signing up. Big names like Richard Branson were forming teams. And that meant one thing: failure wasn't an option. So Roger joined the effort. And today, he's still there, team principal of Andretti Formula E and chairman of the Formula E Teams Association. And here's the thing about Formula E. It transcends politics and culture. It succeeds because the racing is fast, chaotic, and wildly competitive, and because the fan experience is pure electricity. And those quiet EVs, that's a feature, not a bug. It means they can race through city centers and makes the events more immersive, more inclusive, more fun. And the business? Well, it's proof that the zero carbon future is not only necessary, but high performance. Here's my conversation with Roger. Roger, welcome to Supercool.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here.
I'd love to go back to the beginning when Formula E was becoming an idea, it was going to happen. I read an article about you, this journalist who's covered the industry for a while, Ann Prophet. What she wrote was, and this is a quote, she said, "Quite frankly, I don't know that I've ever seen Roger Griffiths so animated, so excited, and so engaged when talking about a racing series." And then you go on and say, this is cutting edge, this is the future. And so this must be the moment when you start to be convinced about Formula E. But let's use that as a launch point. Take us back. Tell us a little bit about your career that got you to that moment, and then what you started to see going back about a decade as Formula E was getting off the ground.
If we go back to where Formula E started, which was 12 years ago, I recently joined the Michael Andretti organization, Andretti Autosport as it was known at the time. I'd had just over 10 years with Honda Performance Development. I moved over to the US from the epicenter of motorsport in the UK. I joined Honda in 2003 and ultimately ended up as technical director at Honda Performance Development, leading the IndyCar efforts and the sports car racing program, which started off as Acura and then became the HPD program. So very much a petrol head, or an ethanol head as it transpired with IndyCar, because we switched away from methanol fuel to ethanol. But it was all about conventional motor racing, a lot of noise, a lot of smells, sounds, vibrations. And prior to that, some years in Formula One, super touring car racing, Le Mans, etc. So quite a diverse motorsport career. And when I joined Andretti, there wasn't a specific role that I had. I was overseeing all of the motorsport programs from, where are we today? Where do we need to be in the future? Not so much the day-to-day of the operation of an IndyCar team or something like that. More about what are we doing? What should we be doing? What's coming up in the future? And Michael had just started to get involved with the Formula E program. The initial conversations had taken place prior to me joining the organisation. But he said to me, you need to go and have a look at this. And I'm like, electric racing? Are we sure about this? Anyhow, so I went to see it. I went to Donington, where the Formula E organisation had set up their operational base. They were operating the commercial aspect out of Hong Kong and Hammersmith in London, and that's where they still are today. But the operational centre was up at the Donington racetrack, an iconic circuit in the Midlands. It's probably best known for that incredible start to the European Grand Prix in 1993, where Ayrton Senna overtook everybody on the opening lap and Michael actually crashed out. So I went out there, I met the team, I saw the car for the first time, and to be honest, I was not impressed. The team was fine, but the car, not so much. It was a very basic, generic Dallara single-seater, some really quite nasty pieces on it, and it was a pretty rudimentary electric powertrain. And a very big battery, very heavy battery with not a great deal of energy. But I was able to look beyond that, and I could see the potential. And really for me, and I've said this on a few occasions, what I saw were the people who put their reputations on the line. So you had a number of high-profile individuals in motorsport, not least my own boss, Michael, but we had Alain Prost, we had a couple of his race team, the Edam's racing team, we had Abt from Germany, very high-profile DTM team, Richard Branson from the Virgin organisation had signed up as well. So there were people that were high-profile. You had Michelin providing the tyres, you had Renault were doing the electrical integration with the car. Sir Frank Williams was part of it in the early days. You had another UK company, Hewland Engineering. So there were people that had reputations at stake. And I sort of looked at this and thought, we can't afford this to fail. Because if it does fail, it's going to bring down a lot of people that have got a lot invested in this. And I thought, come hell or high water, they're going to make this work. I don't know how it's going to work. And after we ran the cars for the first time, I was like, wow, we've got a long way to go to make this work. And considering this was May, June time of 2014, and we needed to be in Beijing in September for an opening round. So I was like, there's a mountain to climb here. But one of the things that really stood out to me was, as a group of teams, and the 12 teams at the time, we all recognised that the only way we were going to succeed was to be collaborative, to work together. And that's what we did, and that's what got us to the first race and ultimately a successful first race.
I read about that race in Beijing, and I read that the engine was maybe, or the propulsion system was maybe a 200 kilowatt system. And I thought, as we were preparing,
it wasn't even that actually.
Yeah, 150 maybe, right? I think it was 150, something like that. And I thought, well, that has to be, because if you drive for 3 minutes, you're probably just done, like just given what you're trying to accomplish. And you look at where the cars are today, and my understanding is now it looks like that car has 4 times as much power in it, 600 kilowatts versus what it started with 12 years ago.
Yeah, it's come a long way. I remember in Beijing, and they only ever did this once, they had a formation lap, because that's what you always did in racing. You have a formation lap. It's really there to warm the tyres up, to warm the engine up, blah, 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 get ready to go racing. It was the slowest formation lap you have ever seen, because literally it was like 30 miles an hour, because nobody wanted to expend any energy on the formation lap, because we had a ludicrously low amount of energy. Anything that you spent on that formation lap was compromising your race. So it was a one and done as far as formation laps in Formula E go. I mean, even within 1 year, we've just got back from Shanghai, and I was looking at the qualifying times in Shanghai. Between season 10 and season 11, which was just a few days ago, we were 5 seconds a lap faster in just 1 year. Now, there's a few things that play into that, and I know the track was resurfaced. The change from Gen 3 to Gen 3 Evo. So we now have a car that's got four-wheel drive in qualifying mode. We've got a new tyre. But it's just shown that in 12 months, we've gone 5 seconds faster. And it's not an isolated case in Shanghai. If you look back to Brazil, the opening round of the season, we were over 3 seconds a lap faster in qualifying. So it shows the genuine pace. I mean, if you look at where Formula E's come generally from that car that raced in Beijing, we needed 2 cars to complete the race because we didn't have enough energy. We could run for about 22, 23 minutes and then we were done. But the races were 45 minutes long, so how are we going to do it? So we've come from there. With the Gen 2 car, we were able to go that same race distance, but on one car, one battery. And then Gen 3, the performance has picked up. And then as we look to the next generation of car, Gen 4, we can have a car that's genuinely quick. And the one thing that people said as we transitioned from Gen 2 to Gen 3, and we were out there testing, was like, wow, the car looks quite quick. And now we're going yet faster still. And for Gen 4, we're going to be a very respectable lap time comparison to some other very high-profile championships. So it's coming on so fast. And that's what, going back to the original Annie Profit article, I saw the potential for where this championship could go and the opportunity that it offered us all. And that, hence, the enthusiasm I had then and the enthusiasm I have today, it's not diminished in any way, shape or form.
It's so interesting. There's so much that I want to get into on the technology side and the evolution of the technology. Just to think about that moment, you mentioned all those people who had committed to making Formula E happening. We moved to North Carolina about 10 years ago, and so we moved to
NASCAR country.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
grew up in New York, not really, certainly not a NASCAR fan. Occasionally, Indy would be on at my friend's house whose dad loved Indy. And so the one name that I knew was Mario Andretti. I grew up with, that was in every year when the Indy 500 would come on, we'd watch. But with NASCAR, I've started to wonder, because my kid got very into it, my 8-year-old, and we started going to races, was, okay, you have these dynamics of an aging audience. It's very exciting. It's the thrill of being there. I mean, I love being at races, but you don't necessarily have, in my view, like the most cutting edge technology in that car. I drive a Tesla. That thing is so incredibly fast. It's probably faster than most cars on the road, and it's just like a normal Tesla. Yet that leap it's baby steps, right? But this was like, no, we're going all in. We're going to do this. Is that also because for Formula E, there's the global audience? It's a different customer who's further along than perhaps an American audience just in terms of adoption of understanding EVs. Is that what also it made it possible?
I think there's a number of things. I mean, if you go back to 2014, you were really at the start of the EV acceptance as a car that you or I could go to a showroom and buy. And when I look back at how engineering and cars have evolved over the last 100 plus years, at the beginning of the automobile back in the late 1900s, you had all of this different types of technology. It wasn't the sort of engine that we have ended up with today, which is a sort of a generic 4-cylinder or V6 engine with turbochargers and direct injection and all that kind of stuff. There was all sorts of technology being thrown at it. We had all sorts of engine configurations. We hadn't just settled on the 4-stroke cycle. There were Stirling cycles, Rankine cycles, all different types of engine technology. If you look back to where we were in 2014, that was the same spot we were with EVs, and we still are today. There's all sorts of different solutions to electric motors, to the powertrain, where the battery technology is evolving, how the car is being used. So for me, we were right at the beginning of that development path, and it was accelerating so fast. And even the differences between year 1 and year 3 in Formula E were huge in terms of what the manufacturers were able to do, because in that first season we all had the same technology. We had the same battery technology. We still share that battery technology across the grid today because we've made conscious decisions about what we open up for development and what we leave closed, and mostly that's due to cost. But on the electric powertrain, so the electric motor, the power inverter, the transmission system, we started with a car that had a 5-speed gearbox. There isn't a racing car today on the Formula E grid that's got more than 1 speed. So we very quickly moved from 5-speed to single speed. The electric motor technology has evolved, and it evolved in different directions depending on which manufacturer you worked with. We've had a range of engine speeds from, let's say, 14,000 RPM up to 35,000 RPM, and that range still exists today. Maybe not quite as wide as that, but it's getting faster and faster and faster. The way the power inverter works, so the power inverter being the bit that converts the DC voltage coming out of the battery to AC voltage to go to the electric motor, that is changing. And these are things that are having a direct impact on where the road car market is. And one of the things that excited me was we always talk about win on Sunday, sell on Monday. The trickle-down effect of technology developed in racing we ultimately see in road cars. And it's been a nice story over the years, but the reality is road cars are more sophisticated than racing cars today. I mean, certainly the control systems on road cars are way beyond where we are with racing, and that's by regulation, not because we're not as smart. It's just the way the championships have evolved. But what we are genuinely seeing in Formula E is technology transfer, racing to the road. One example that was close to us when we had our relationship with BMW was that they actually got the engineering team from the i3 project, so the little mini all-electric vehicle that BMW had a few years back, and they used those guys to help design, working with the motorsport guys, to design the electric powertrain. So there was a couple of reasons of that. One is there was some really interesting technology that BMW had in their road cars that they wanted to apply to racing, but they also wanted to teach the road car guys the racing mentality, the timelines, the philosophy about how you need to accelerate development for racing. So they wanted that to then bring that back to future road cars to make better road cars. So there are genuine stories. I know Jaguar talks about how the software development around the Formula E program actually increased the range of the I-Pace. So things they were doing around energy management, drive cycles, things like that in racing had a direct impact on making the I-Pace go 20 or 30 miles further on an equivalent charge for the battery. So there are genuine stories that we can hold our hands up and say, this is the impact that Formula E's had on production cars.
As the sport has evolved, you mentioned everybody basically had the same car, season one. So has that progressively opened up to say teams can now work on more and more of the car, whether it's the transmission or these components you're describing, the inverter? Do those become more proprietary to the teams?
It's the manufacturers, so there's a little bit of a definition that needs to be understood. There are currently 11 teams, so we're the competitors, we're the people that actually take that finished product and go racing with it. But behind us, there are what we refer to as the manufacturers. So in our case, it's Porsche, but Jaguar, Stellantis, Nissan, and also now the Lola Yamaha team. They're the manufacturers, so they're the people that are developing the technology. So the electric motors, the transmissions, etc., that we as effectively customers take and go racing with. They focus on purely the powertrain aspect. But then there's the chassis, the bodywork, the aerodynamics, etc., which is all developed by a French company called Spark Racing Technology. So they developed the chassis in conjunction with Dallara. So that piece is frozen, and every one of us uses the same chassis, the same bodywork. And that was a conscious decision decided way back when to focus the championship around electric powertrain development. If you want to do full aerodynamics, full vehicle dynamics, there's another championship, it's called Formula One. So if you want to have that diversity, then you need to spend a lot more money. The idea was to prevent spending on things that really didn't make a difference to the electric powertrain, to focus everything on the powertrain. On the battery side of things, there is a really, really strong argument to open it up from a spec battery that we all use, because I think that would really make some great technical solutions around the battery. But we're all terrified about what kind of war that creates. If you end up with the big battery manufacturers, the cell providers, whoever that might be, Samsung, LG, Sony, whoever producing these cells, going to battle, and one of them locks in on the perfect solution or the best solution, it could absolutely destroy the championship overnight. So by having the battery held constant, it gives us a level playing field in that area, and it still gives the manufacturers lots of opportunity to develop technology around the electric motor powertrain, the powertrain piece, but it sort of keeps costs under control as well. It's still very expensive, but it could be an awful lot more expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure. The i3, the BMW example, that's really interesting. I know that's been a car when it came out and for many years just won loads of awards. I think in the US as a little mini hatchback, that's not necessarily something that we gravitate to. But what's interesting also is you talked about that transfer of mindset, maybe more than anything else, but from the racing team into either the development org or the design org or the engineering. But before the show, when we were talking, I mentioned I had co-founded this company, Planted. I started it with two guys who came from SpaceX, and they were building rocket ships. One of the things that they brought to our company, because this is what SpaceX does, SpaceX almost exclusively hires kids who, while they're in university, have worked on essentially race cars. And so we started doing the same thing. So my co-founder would go to Michigan every year to try and recruit kids, and then we come back and be like, well, how'd it go? And he'd be like, well, Tesla's there, SpaceX is there, right? Like, it's not that easy. But there's
Formula SAE. That's where you get everybody.
Formula SAE, exactly. That's always where we're trying to recruit from. Because for us, and I would wonder, like for you on a race team, for the guys I was working with, it wasn't just the skill set. It was also the understanding of, I'm an engineer. I'm not just like going to Caterpillar or some company where I'm going to get siloed into one thing. Like I learned how to do everything. I'm responsible for the chassis, and that means I don't have to design the chassis. I got to figure out the suppliers. I got to actually own the timetable, and it's a different frame of mind. How does that play into a racing team?
I mean, it's more than that. It's the mentality. When I was at Honda, we used to go to that same Michigan Formula SAE competition, and you knew everybody was pretty smart. But what you were doing is you were watching people work, and you were watching people more when it was adversity that they were facing than when things were going right. When things are going right, it's super easy, anyone can do the job. But when things are not going to plan, it's how people react, it's how people deal with the pressure. Do they rise to the challenge or do they fall flat on their faces? And what we were looking at is the human side of it, because we figured if they're there, they're smart. So we've got that box ticked. But it's how do you work in that environment? In racing, that is a massive part of the right fit to the team. Because if you've got a degree, you've proven that you can learn, you can absorb information, you can pass an exam if you like. The next step is, do you really want to work in racing? Because racing is not straightforward. It's not a 9 till 5 job. I mean, are you good with being away from home for 150 days a year? Are you good with missing birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, whatever? Hopefully you don't miss your own wedding, but you've got to want to do it, because when you're at the racetrack at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe all your friends are just crawling out of a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's got to be more than just a job, and you've got to have that passion. So this is what we look for, because if you take that passion, and I think the Andretti Formula E team is a really, really good example of that. We're an underdog. We're a relatively small team compared to some of the bigger factory programs, but we punch way above our weight category. If you look at some of the highlight reels that Formula E puts together of people celebrating race wins and all the rest of it, more often than not they focus on our team, because they see the sheer emotion that comes out when we win. It's because everyone is super passionate about the job, and they've also recognised the effort, the sacrifice, if you like, that's gone into getting us to where we are. It's what makes me super proud about representing the team.
Within Andretti Racing, you have lots of different teams. You have the Formula One, the Indy Next, and others. I guess a couple of questions. I've read this is kind of an evolving dynamic within Andretti Racing. Where does Formula E sit, perhaps, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, in terms of like business priority, but also, do people want to go work on Formula E? Like young people, do they see this as the thing that's the future that they want to be part of? Or is it just a mix because there's so many different awesome opportunities?
I think with our own organisation, we're kind of represented across pretty much every racing platform there is out there. The Andretti Global organisation with Indy Next, IndyCar, Formula E, and then you've got Spire Motorsport in NASCAR, you've got Wayne Taylor Racing in IMSA, and now you've got the new Cadillac Formula One program. We're all under the TWG Motorsport umbrella, if you like. I mean, it does give us a great deal of diversity. Where does Formula E sit? We're one of 2 world championships that we're either competing in or will be competing in. So you've got the Formula E World Championship, and then you've got the Formula One World Championship. So it is a global championship. That's super important for us to be represented there, and that was one of the reasons why we got involved in Formula E in the very early days, because when Michael was looking at his racing programs, the portfolio of programs, if you like, we were very centered around IndyCar. And IndyCar at the time wasn't on great foundations. It was a little shaky. There was question marks over the ownership, about what was going to happen in the future. So we needed to diversify. And this is what Michael looked at. He was also very passionate about the environment and providing a better place for his growing family. That's the mentality of where we got to when we first started this program. As we've watched the championship grow, it's very interesting because on the commercial side, I'm involved in these discussions with our various partners. In 2014, 2015, sustainability was the new buzzword that all of our sponsors were talking about. At the time, we were associated with a company like DHL, and they wanted to know what our sustainability credentials were. It was really difficult to point to them in IndyCar, but we said, we have Formula E. This is a new platform. And they said, oh, we know about Formula E. We really like that. And it was starting to answer or tick boxes to some of the sponsors that we had. It opened doors for us to have sponsorship conversations. It didn't make getting the deal done any easier, but it allowed us to have that conversation. And without that, if you would just say, hey, would you like to sponsor our IndyCar team? It was like, thanks, no thanks.
Yeah.
We've got Formula E. Oh, what's that? We've kind of heard about that. We'd like to understand more. And we'd start talking about not only our race team, but also the series as a whole, and what they were doing in terms of the environment, in terms of sustainability, what their credentials were around that. And that really got a lot of interesting conversations going that we would never have had without Formula E. And Formula E has continued to be that leader in terms of net zero from day zero, I think is their slogan that they talked about. What we do around how we power the cars in terms of where does our electricity come from? Coal-fired furnace or some other renewable source, hydrogen, whatever it might be. So it's got a lot of conversations going, and people are now looking at it, and it's no longer acceptable to not have a sustainability platform. We're working very hard in certifying the race team to the highest environmental standards, whether it's internal ones within the FIA, so the world governing body, or external ones like ISO 14001. This is all part of our daily life, and we have weekly meetings talking about how can we be a better environmental partner and things like that. It's changed the way we go racing.
Yeah, I have to imagine that's just got to be such an interesting culture change. As you said, growing up as a petrol head, what you're saying mirrors a number of conversations we have across industries. When someone like a DHL shows up and everyone's saying, how are we going to engage DHL? How are we going to engage these global brands? And you have global brands who are saying, yeah, we're interested, but I don't know if we really want to like tie our brand to something that doesn't have this sustainability component that's important to us, right? What we often hear when I talk to companies, almost doesn't matter what solution they're selling. They would say, look, sustainability opens the door, but sustainability doesn't close the deal. And so I would think in this context, and I was looking at the global fan base for Formula E, right? And now you say, okay, well, we reach 374 million fans. That was season 10, but it's growing like 23% per year, 35, these huge numbers. And so I would think if I could go to a sponsor and I could say, look, we're doing this incredible thing, net zero from, what'd you say, day zero? Or you get the concept. We're doing this incredible thing for the planet. And everyone's like, oh, awesome. And we have like 400 million fans in all the major markets around the globe. And this is probably, I'm guessing, a younger, highly intelligent, global cosmopolitan audience who's really tuned in and dialed into what we're doing. Wouldn't you like to go get in front of that fan base and be on the cutting edge of tech with us? And yes, we have this sustainability thing. I would think that would be a great sell.
I mean, you've just written our sales pitch. That is how we do it. To update on your numbers, last year's TV audience was 490 million.
Wow.
We're
Okay.
trending plus 10%, plus 15% on that for this year. There is a target by 2030 to reach 850 million viewers worldwide. So the viewership is improving. What does that mean here in the United States? This year we had a race, I think it was Mexico City, and it was some really smart programming. It was done on the back of one of the NFL playoff games. So we had a carryover audience of 43 million or whatever watched the playoff game. Nearly 11 million stayed tuned in to watch Formula E. So it's not only bringing us in front of the racing audience, it's bringing us in front of a sports fan audience. And that's what I feel we need to reach, because the motorsport fan, at the end of the day, if you're a real motorsport fan, you'll watch lawnmowers racing. You don't care. It's competition. If it's NASCAR, it's Formula One, it's whatever. You have your own personal favourites. But what we need to do is to reach that household audience, to start getting in front of consumer brands. And that's always the challenge with any racing series. But I think once you sort of tip over that 500 million global TV audience, consumer brands start to get interested. I mean, typically the sponsors in Formula E today are associated with the OEM partners. So when we were with BMW, we had a partner called Magna. Probably not a household name, but a huge company in the automotive industry. As a consultancy, they manufacture bodies for BMW, they do all sorts of stuff. And when you look at the other partners on the car, you had Harman Kardon. So yes, kind of a small consumer brand, but it was a provider of high-end hi-fi systems into the BMW vehicles. We had another German tool manufacturer. So all things linked back to BMW. What we now need to do is to transition away from those business-to-business relationships to front and center consumer brands. And I think it just needs one or two to come to Formula E, and then we'll see that landslide of brands coming in. I think we're right about on that point now.
You've been involved with this since the beginning. What do you attribute that massive growth in fan base to? Why is the average fan who's not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to watch go-kart racing or whatever, why is that person tuning in, do you think?
One, we're now starting to get on to free-to-air TV channels. So we're not behind a paywall. That really helps us. It's not every market, but it's many markets now we're getting out there. The package that we present on TV is fan-friendly. So our races are circa 45 minutes long, and they can package in with a pre-race show and a post-race show maybe an hour and 15 minutes. That's not too much time out of somebody's day. The race at 45 minutes is within the attention span of most of the audience. You know yourself, if something starts going over an hour, you're fading. So we've got a fan-friendly package. And also from a sporting perspective, there's a lot of excitement going on in Formula E races. And if you look at F1 compared to FE at Monaco, you can probably count on two hands how many passes there are in an F1 race at Monaco. Formula E, you're going to need all your hands, all your friends' hands, and all their friends' hands as well, because we're up at 400 passes. Now, some of those are artificial passes, but there's genuine overtaking, there's genuinely exciting racing. Typically, this year's maybe a bit different. We take 3 or 4 guys to the final race with a potential of winning the championship. So the championship is not done 5 races out. It may be this year the way Oliver Rowland's romping off into the distance, but that's quite unique. So it's excitement at every level. And I think that's what's attractive to us. I mean, a fan on site perspective, because it's an electric racing car, it's relatively quiet. Someone actually said to me the other day, you know, I might have to start thinking about bringing ear defenders to a Formula E race because the cars are actually getting quite loud. There is a shriek to them. It's not the conventional combustion engine sound, but they are starting to get quite loud. But what that means is that we can race in city centres, which means we're not asking people to drive an hour, 2 hours away from their home to a racetrack in the middle of nowhere. So they can make a day of it. It's an event, it's not just a race. So there's more going on just the racing. And it caters to a family. Because of the noise that we were talking about, it's not painful for children to go and watch a race. There's fun stuff going on all of the time. Not necessarily on the racetrack, but around it. And it's also somewhat educational as well, with an e-village where you can learn about new technology. So it's an experience which I think is more in line with what an audience is expecting today, because many of the people that come to our races, the younger audience, have no interest in owning or driving a car. With Uber, with really good public transportation in many of the cities, and the inconvenience and expense of owning a car, you know, we've got to cater to that crowd. And I think Formula E has recognised that, and they've got some smart marketing people. I mean, we've just come off the back of doing the Evo sessions with all the content creators, Mr. Beast and all people like that, Yes Theory, that worked with us. It's approaching it from a different way. And it's bringing people from outside of motorsport into motorsport and bringing the ideas that they made work in maybe Premier League football or baseball or whatever it might be, and identifying it's not just a racing audience we're going after. If it is just a racing audience, our numbers would be 100 million and not 500 million. So it's a different approach, a different mindset.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about you have a younger fan base that doesn't even aspire to own a car. Yeah. Views a car in a totally different light than their parents or previous generations. I want to stay on that fan experience because I was reading about someone had gone to Monaco to see the Formula E. Maybe they'd been there for both races. It was a longtime fan. They said, okay, Formula One in Monaco is like one of the most prestigious, iconic events on the globe. And they said, you know what that is? It's inaccessible for most people. It's untouched, the height of luxury. It is what it is. And they said Formula E was a totally different vibe. It just had a more open, inclusive, inviting feeling. Because of the noise, they said Formula E is experimenting more with sound during the race and maybe music and other things that actually does make it a different kind of immersive experience that maybe does cater, right? From your view, is this where the future of racing is going? Is Formula E a bellwether of like, if we're going to continue to grow the audience, all of racing needs to learn from some of these strategies and tactics?
It's almost like a trading of who can come up with the most creative idea between Formula E and Formula One. I would say that in general, with things like attack mode, the pit boost opportunity that we've now brought in, the car swaps, whatever it might have been, Formula E has not been scared to try new things. I remember when Alejandro Agag, we were in a meeting in Geneva, he first came up with this concept of attack mode, which is straight out of Super Mario Brothers. You run over something on the racetrack and then you're whizzing past everybody else. And I said to him at the time, the old me would said, what a stupid idea. Why would we do that? The new me says, I'm not sure, but I'll give it a go. And that's the difference. Formula E has not been scared to try things. Not everything has worked. I mean, the fan boost thing where you could vote for your favourite driver and get a minuscule increase in performance was, it flopped. In all honesty, we kept doing it for far too long, even though only 25 people were voting or something like that. And it was so corrupt. They used to tell us that they were doing this great auditing system. Not at all. We knew that people were buying votes. But I think because Formula E is new, it's like the new kid on the block. It has almost a hall pass to be able to get out of doing things conventionally. And it's always attracted leadership that's not scared of taking a risk. I think the other championships are so big that if they do something and it doesn't work, it's a real big black mark. Whereas Formula E, it's like, oh, didn't work, let's try the next new thing. But we have got to the point where we're able to say, look, we can't just introduce a new thing each week. We have to let things settle down. The key thing that we're trying to get on top of is the explanation to the fan. So the fan can actually follow what's going on, and trying to look at the regulations as we develop them so that they're simple to understand, so that the racing concept is simple to understand. It's not always been that successful. We had a situation just this past season in Miami when we raced down in Homestead, and like 5 out of the top 10 cars, including the winner, although they crossed the line in that order, that wasn't the official finishing order. That is not good. So we need to look at how we improve that communication, how we adapt the regulations so situations like that don't happen. But what it does show is that we're responsive, we're reactive, we've got people that are invested in trying to make it better, and we understand who our key customer is. And our key customer is the person watching, whether it's on television or live at the racetrack. So I think that is a difference where Formula E stands out.
You mentioned when we started talking, Roger, in terms of the race car development, there were some things you just weren't going to touch. Everyone was just going to have a similar system, whether that was the battery or other key components. And part of that was cost, and part of it was, well, if someone actually goes all in and invents a certain battery, it could blow up the dynamic. So today in Formula E, across the teams, you're all intense competitors, you all want to win championships, but how would you describe, is there like an esprit de corps? I mean, this is still a new league. You guys are all still trying to make something succeed. You want to grow the audience. There's an education component to that. What is that dynamic like between the teams or your colleagues? Do you guys ignore each other? Do you say hi? I know you're in different organizations together. What's that like?
It's surprisingly great. I mean, one of the things I said right at the beginning, when we first had the car, we knew the only way to make this work was to work together, to solve the problems. And at the time, we created an organisation called the Formula E Teams Association. It's actually a registered company. And basically, it's all of us as team principals and leading executives within the race team. We sit together each week at the racetrack. We talk through the challenges. It's something that we did back in day one, and it's something that we still do today. As team principals, we feel that we have not only a responsibility to our sponsors, our owners, our drivers, our fans to do as well as we can individually, but we have a responsibility to the sport to make the sport as good as it can be for all of us, because we all recognise that there's a lot of passion around Formula E and we love the sport. We want to see it survive, not least of all because we all like to have a job tomorrow, but we need to work together to grow. And what we've been able to do is not only come together as a group of teams, but to invite in Formula E as the promoter and to invite in FIA as the sanctioning body. So we meet for 2 hours every race weekend. The first hour is a closed door meeting between the team principals where we talk about openly the challenges that we face, whether it's how did the last race in Tokyo go, what are we looking forward to Shanghai, what are the next step in commercial negotiations, what should we do around regulations, blah, blah, blah. We all talk openly. And then we invite Formula E and the FIA to join us in that meeting, and they come and the FIA will talk about maybe the technical updates around the new car that's coming. Formula E will talk about all the TV numbers and a new promotional idea and maybe the cities that are interested in hosting a race. I have a unique perspective on this because I currently am the chairman of that group, and I'm actually in my second term of being the chairman, so I've seen it from season 3 and 4 when I first was chairman, and now in season 11 and 12. It's been massively effective, and one of the things that I really ran on my first sort of manifesto, if you like. As a group, we are stronger if we are aligned. If we can go to Formula E and say, all of us agree that this is the right thing to do, that's better than 6 of us saying that we should do this and 5 of us saying we shouldn't do it. If we can speak with one voice, we're so much more powerful. And we've been super successful with that. What it means is, I wouldn't say every single one of the team principals is somebody I want to go and have a beer with, but there are genuine friendships in the paddock. We have dinners together. We've organised a meeting next week in Paris. So we're going to be in Paris, all 11 team principals. We're all going for dinner afterwards, all together. And they're actually super fun evenings out together. We genuinely enjoy each other's company. We try and do this once or twice a year. I challenge Formula One to have a dinner like that where you get, Toto and Christian and Zach and all those guys in the room together, Fred Vasseur, and see if they can even be sociable with each other without trying to steal something from each other. One of the first text messages I receive if we've ever had a race win is from another team principal. We as Andretti won the World Championship in season 9. It was an extremely popular win within the paddock because they knew how hard we'd fought for this, how long we'd been trying to have this success. And so many other teams and team principals came up to me and said, super proud of you guys. You guys absolutely deserve that. It's a great atmosphere. Now, we don't always agree, but we've also established a protocol that if we've come to an agreement within a meeting, not everybody's going to like it, but we walk out of there with one voice and we don't try and undermine that decision that was taken 5 minutes after we've all agreed to do it. So it's been very effective from that perspective.
What I love about the conversation that we've had is that we're having a conversation about a race series that's now 12 years old, part of a global sport, a race series that has 500 million fans. You're talking about speed. You're talking about incredible technological advancement that's moving so fast. And underpinning it is this conversation around net zero, all this technology that is so important for solving climate. And you can just enjoy the sport. That's there. It doesn't have to be in your face, but it's part of it. It's just integrated, right? One, it's really impressive. Congratulations. It's just so exciting just to hear about the success of how this is going and to know that there is this global sport that has that point of view, but it succeeds on the face of the competition, the technological prowess, the fan experience, all the things that really make a league world class.
It's a super exciting championship, and hopefully my enthusiasm and passion for it comes across in the way I talk about the championship. It's had its challenges. I mean, when COVID hit, and we did 6 races in 9 days in Berlin, that wasn't the greatest solution. It wasn't a great solution from anybody involved in trying to do it. It was probably the most miserable 2 weeks of most of our lives in motorsport. But it's corrected and it's looking for the next step forward. It's always evolving in a positive manner, and we're not scared to talk about the tough aspects of the business. And it is a business at the end of the day because when you look at the economics of it, whilst we live in a cost cap world, so we have a restricted amount of money that we're allowed to spend, where do we get the budget to spend that money from? So it's still a challenging sponsorship market. We can always argue whether there's enough prize money or not enough prize money. We can always say whether drivers are being paid too much or too little. And the sponsorship market is difficult. Every time we think we're turning the corner on a recession or an uptick in the economy, something else comes along to challenge us, whether it's tariffs or whatever it might be. There's always speed bumps for us to overcome. But, as a community, as the Formula E community, we work to overcome these. And at the same time, I talked about the strong relationship between all of the team principals and the teams in general. But we're fiercely competitive once those lights go green and we go racing. But we're able to then, talk sensibly about it on Monday morning after the Sunday afternoon race.
Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Roger. If you enjoyed it and appreciate the perspective Supercool brings to the business and climate conversation, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. It's the best way you can help us reach new audiences who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.